Hello and welcome to Generational Leadership. Right now, we're going to dive into what does the research say? Because I don't want you to think that this is just a bunch of opinions. This is just me just making a bunch of videos, my team just coming up with content. No, this is founded in research. This is founded in books, in academic research. It's all types of research that have been surveys, assessments, open-ended questions, all types of things given out to tons and tons of executives, managers, teenagers, all sorts of things to really culminate this data here. And so I want you to understand where this research comes from. And though this might not be super interesting to you, understand that you need to know where your content comes from because you need to understand the validity behind it. So that's what we want to provide you here with today. So we're going to dive in. I'm just going to explore the different articles, the different research projects we went into, the different books we read, and all the things that we culminated this data for. So you can really understand this. How do I apply this? And then if you're ever interested in any more, you can go to these resources. They are exceptional. I've read all of them to really understand what is going on with this. What is the research saying? So I want to stop there. I want to make a point. Right now, media drives our understanding, not research, not academics, media. And yes, it is powerful. And a new survey comes out every day that says some sort of number of this generation is this. But the thing is, where does that data come from? It's very important to understand. And what you'll get here is that all of this data came from validated research. And that's what I want to dive in today. So let's check out, where did this research come from? Now, before I start, I want to say there's lots of different theories, and we're going to explore one here about, is generational differences a real thing? Or is it something else? So we're going to dive in and look at that. So where does this course come from? Where does generational leadership derive its understanding? It's this research. So let's look at this. I just want to give you some of the background. So the first thing is, there's a big generational debate between, is there really a difference in generations, or is it just life stages? That's one of the biggest debates. And so when we look at generational differences in life stages, we look at first generational differences. So you'll find out in the next module that generations are really based on shared experiences and cultural trends that are going on at the time that people are alive, and that they're shaping that generation, and they're shaping things. So when we look at this, I just wanted to share a few of these, is that, and you'll experience this in that next module, but it's really talking about is that dramatic events that happen, leaders they follow, shared values they create through their experiences, and the popular culture actually create these generations. So instead of being a life stage, just everybody from 20 to 30 does this, and 40 to 50, and 60 to 70, and so on. Instead, it's saying each of those generations is dramatically shifting the way that they view the workplace, the way that they view society, government, their values, their beliefs, their attitudes. All of it is shaped on those shared experiences and cultural trends. Now, if we do look at the validity of life stage, it really talks about that. There we go. It says that in life stage, it doesn't. Life stage says that generational differences do not account for life or career stage, which means is that when we're isolating a generation, like for example, right now the biggest one is the millennials. We're isolating it, and we're not accounting for the fact that they're young in their career, or that they're still not as mature and they haven't taken on some certain responsibilities. That's what life stage says. It also says that there's a smaller sample size being used for a lot of this data. And the thing is all academic research has sample size. It's the max reach that they can have to maintain their validity, the reliability, the ethics of their research, their surveys, their assessments. I like this. It's not generalized to a more diverse population. They're looking at it in very small terms within small companies, within certain things, and not trying to diversify it across a larger population. And I think this is an interesting topic. It says that one of the biggest complaints from the life stage in the idea of generational differences is that human development, their thinking and their decision-making is complex. And that is the truth. No amount of academic research will ever prove that much about our development, our thinking process, our values, our beliefs, and why are those innate to us. There's so much research out there about it, but none of it really validifies that complex system. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at what is the research that really supports generational differences. So the first one I bring up is the first article that I pulled up, and it's called Managing Diversity or Generational Diversity at the Workplace, Expectations and Perceptions of Generational Differences. And it's actually from the African Journal of Business and Management. And so here's the couple things that it pops up with. First, it gives you a general characteristic of 3 different generations of employees. It goes through baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And it actually talks about their individual work characteristics, their work attitudes, and their philosophy. I love that when it talks about how the baby boomers were work, 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 and that the millennials are more, life first, work second concept. And it talks about how those philosophies are different. And then therefore our values are different. So you're going to see this as we go through all these modules. Second one is called Strategies for Leadership Styles of Multi-Generational Workforce. This is the National American University. And they really went through, and I liked this one. It really went through the leadership and generational differences. So it actually talks about what different types of leadership do they use. And then this was the part I love, these 3 bullet points at the bottom. They went through what a lot of different associations say are the recommendations for maximizing a generation. This is where I just get passionate about it, is how do I maximize the people I'm with? And here's what it is. They come from Society of Human Resources, that's called SHRAM. The American Institute of Architects put out recommendations. The U.S. Department of Commerce in 2011 put out a bunch of recommendations of how do you maximize the potential of each generation. And that's where we get this. So this is one of the most passionate parts about our program here. Next one says, validating generational differences, a legitimate diversity and leadership issue. I love that. A legitimate diversity and leadership issue. Generational differences are a legitimate diversity and leadership issue. This again came from Westchester University. That's where a lot of good research comes from. And what they really did was they looked at what is generational diversity. And this is where a lot of this is founded in, is the idea that why we created this course was for that generational diversity, for the ability to actually start accessing the best out of everyone that we had. And then this is the research that shows what is a generation. You'll see that video where we talk about the 6 causes of generational differences. This is the research that went into showing what are those, what form the generations. The last thing they did that I loved is they actually did a survey of the admired leadership traits. They asked open-ended questions of what formed your generation. And it was so interesting. They got 2,500 answers from executives, managers, culminated that data. And what you're going to find out is that our generations aren't that different when it comes to real core values. There's a few differences, but I just want to share that the number one in every single one of them was honesty. It's the most admired leadership trait across all generations. Honesty. Very powerful. Okay, the generations debate. This was fun. It's finding facts among the myths. This came from Kenexa Research Institute. And this is the one that I really liked because it showed what was the idea behind life stages and what's the differences between generations and the general myths and stereotypes, and then what really needs to change about generational leadership. And so this was my favorite article because it really dove into what does life stages say? Because you need to understand the opposite side of something before you can fully understand what you're studying. And so it really laid out what are the life stages, but then it also said, hey, here's the differences in generations, and admitted that there are a lot of differences amongst generations. It's just that there's a lot of myths and stereotypes, and you're going to hear all about them throughout this series. All of the myths and stereotypes, and really what needs to change in our leadership to actually access that generational diversity. Okay, generational leadership. This was from Ready to Manage, and this is what they talked about. And I really liked this one. It was about the importance of generation. Why do we study generations? Why do we learn about generations? Why do we need to value them? The generational characteristics. This was great because it actually went through is what are the characteristics of each generation? You can see motivational preferences. This is a big one of how do you maximize that generation? And when you understand that they have different motivations behind them, it's not always money, it's not always title, it's not always rank, and it's not always material. What is their motivation? What are their core values? This is important because as we talk about, when you look at a generation, each one is shaped differently. Each one has different values they hold very true to themselves. And then leadership style preferences. This is where we get, again, how do you maximize them? And I love this, the patterns and the areas of focus. What are the patterns between the generations? And where do we focus? And here are just the bigger list. So First one, Generations at Work, Managing the Class of Veterans, Boomers, Xers, Nexters in the Workplace. That's an excellent book that was put out. It's a little bit older, but it's an excellent book with lots of great research. It really starts to dive in and show what are the generations. You got Organizational Behavior, an experimental approach. This was great because it actually went into a lot of the generational ideas. You've got Out of the 60s. This was a cool book about the older generations, what formed them. Generation Y, Motivating and Training a New Generation of Employees. Great article. Why and How, Managing Different Generations in the Workplace. This was where a lot of those recommendations came from. Exploring Four Generations' Beliefs About Career. This was a great one because I actually looked at what do you want to get from your career? What is the point of the career? And why are the different generations seeing different ideas of that? The Millennial Manual, awesome book. And Forbes.com has tons of great articles and things. Be very specific about the research that you see in those because they're very powerful. So this is our generational research. This is what this course is founded on. Generational research, you need to understand what you're hearing and where it comes from because we want to know that we're providing valid research into this idea, valid recommendations you can implement in your workplace today. The last thing I want to leave you with is the idea of really focusing on where does that research come from, because every single day there's a new article out there with a new statistic from some survey that says 70% of baby boomers hate millennials. Well, where does that research come from, and who are they actually surveying? And is it a voluntary survey, and what happens with that? So really, you need to know where that comes from, because right now there are so many stereotypes based on what we believe is research. And when we look at it, and I have the funniest list of things where we look at millennials, and there's all this research that says millennials are ruining restaurants, they're ruining our workplaces, they're ruining streets, cars, they're ruining everything, right? And it's all based on some sort of study that someone did. Well, look at where that study comes from. We want you to bring validity to what you see. This course is designed to help you implement new changes in the way that you both view generations and the way that you lead generations. Leadership is all about the followers. It's all about maximizing your team, maximizing your organization, making sure everyone can be their fullest contribution, that they can be there, they're satisfied, they're engaged, they're actually productive, they're effective, they're efficient. That's what leadership is about. It's about creating the team, organizations, and the relationships that you need. Start looking into this course. This course is going to dive into, as we keep going, it's going to dive into what is a generation. Not just what is in those 6 causes, but what is each generation? What formed them? And that's going to be so much fun. So dive into that. Then we've got, how does each generation lead? Like, what is their typical leadership style? And that's super eye-opening because you're going to start to identify, where do you lead? And how is that different than other leaders? And that's where you start to get a little bit more eye-open, especially if you're looking upward and saying, well, that's how they lead me. Okay, that's why. And then the last one is, how do we maximize each generation? We're actually going to dive into some recommendations that tons of research says this is what will make this generation the most satisfied, the most productive, effective. They're going to actually be engaged with you. This is how to maximize their contribution. And the last thing is, why is this so important? And what the heck to do next with all of this information? So generational leadership is an essential course for a company to start accessing their generational diversity. It's based in foundational research, academic research, surveys, open-ended assessments, questionnaires. It is powerful, founded in valid research. So jump in and start exploring what is generational leadership. Thank you.